There we go. Okay.
So good morning, everybody, and thank you for joining us. It's lovely that you've taken the time to join us today. Also, welcome to people who are perhaps watching this on YouTube or through a e-platform or through the Belmas website as well. So welcome to yourselves as well. This session, what we're going to talk to you about is the evolution of going digital, and these are the transformational practices really that we've encountered here at Dear Apprenticeships, and the operational changes that we've made, and how we've integrated what we've called a hybridized synergistic model. So a model that we have come up with, along with some curriculum models as well, and some different ways of thinking as part of the digital strategy that we've produced. Has that changed slides? Has it moved on?
It has.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. So my name is Dr. Claire Indans, and at the apprenticeships here I am the curriculum and delivery manager. That means I manage the curriculum, I head up the staff team, I work with all the teams on things like standardisation and the teaching and the training, but I also teach myself as well. And this is Carl.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Carl Hardwick, the Operations Director here at Dear Apprenticeships. I'll just give you a quick background on Dear. Dear Apprenticeships has been operating now since 2011, so for 12 years. We're a small independent training provider that has 3 strands to the business. Dear Apprenticeships, which speaks for itself, is apprenticeship delivery across a number of standards. I think we currently deliver across 11 standards. We then have Dear Learning, which is where we provide courses working primarily with the unemployed, and getting them work ready and back into employment at the earliest opportunity. For that, we access the government's funding stream of the adult education budget, and then we have a third stream of Dear. Then we have the third stream of Dear Commercial, where we work with independent employers looking at their business and developing courses that will suit upskilling and delivering in their own commercial environment. As I said, we're a small independent training provider. We have around 10 to 12 staff, which includes associate delivery, depending on what arm of the business they're working in at the moment. The business was founded in 2011 by 3 friends. Myself and my 2 colleagues are the owners of the business. Unfortunately, in August of last year, we unexpectedly and tragically lost our managing director, John. He was primarily the face of the business. He ran the business on a day-to-day basis. He operated the business right from the outset. Myself and the other owner only provided limited support and access within the business. Since John's passing, I've now come into the business full time. In regards to our apprenticeship delivery, we have 100% success for all apprentices that get to the endpoint assessment, which is the final examination period for an apprentice. So we're currently at 100% success for every apprentice that reaches endpoint assessment, and we're currently operating at 98% distinction rate for apprentices that reach their endpoint assessment. We work with a number of employers across large and medium and small enterprises. Across the apprenticeship provision, we work with a number of large employers in our commercial delivery, and we work with local Department of Work and Pensions, Job Centre Pluses in the Dear Learning category. In terms of our context and positionality regarding this project, myself as co-owner and director, obviously there's an obvious bias within that this project should go well, but we try to reduce the bias by operating by operating a culture of autonomy and agency within the organisation. So we really like to involve everybody within the organisation within any of the projects that we take on board for development purposes, for business change purposes, and we listen to everybody. Everybody has their voice, and so we try to relieve any bias that we might have as owners through operating a culture like that. Any project that we undertake for change within the business, we always operate a research informed practice. So any project that we need to undertake, any change that we need to undertake, we will always do research on the change before that. Before implementing any change within the business, and that helps us drive the business and inform decisions. So in terms of this particular project, this research is located within post-16 further education and directly arose in May 2021 following 14 months of disruption and educational provision brought about by the coronavirus restrictions. Mandatory government directives, state power, external accountability measures and compliances were all challenges for independent training providers located within hybrid funded political landscapes, and obviously born out of the coronavirus. You know, we were told by government, you must do this, you can't do that, you must do it this way, and that sort of took away any autonomy that we had within the company at that point. Due to the lockdown restrictions the development of a digital strategy became an immediate priority. It was no choice to us. It was the only way of maintaining the business function. We were not allowed into classrooms. We were not allowed into workspaces. So we had to go remote. We had to go online. This 2-year project identified problems, challenges, impacts, barriers, benefits and unexpected outcomes. So when developing the digital strategy, it was born from necessity while simultaneously transitioning to a digital remote provision. So we were thrown into this in the mix, and basically we needed to react to this. The project overview. Research was conducted over 2 years between May 21 and May 23. 18 months of that was action-based research, and 6 months of that, the last 6 months, have been the benefits realization. So how has the company benefited out of this? The overall project would include conception, inception, operationalization, process and review. We would take a whole organization collaborative approach. So everyone within the company would be involved in that. They would all have their say. They would all be listened to. They would all be set tasks to research and develop and further and look at implementation. We decided on a 3-phased approach. That's the 3-phase physical approach, and then an extended 4-phase where we would do the benefits realization. So preceding the project then, there was a shift in provision, and this occurred pre-project through the initial stages of the pandemic. So from March 2020 through to May 2020, what we experienced was an increase in situational, authoritarian, directive and bureaucratic leadership. That was the government telling us what we could do, how we could do it, and you weren't going to deviate from that. There was which obviously brought about a decrease in democracy. We had to be reactive and responsive to operational activity, anything that we were doing. there was a significant rise in structure and a significant reduction in agency. So that is when we talk about the scaffolding, and they're telling us what to do and how we can do it, and the agency is our independence that reduced significantly. During this period, there was also a reframe of provision. So we had to experience things like estimated grades across qualifications and adapted examination processes. The transition itself was from a complete in-person provision to a fully remote operation. So prior to the pandemic, the government insisted that any government-funded provision would take place. That took place would be heavily weighted towards face-to-face provision or classroom-based provision. The transition that we had to incorporate would have to go beyond just the delivery, and would need to look at recruitment, onboarding, administration, teaching, assessment, support, and examination. So the evolution of going digital comprised of the transition to a fully remote model, which had business-wide impacts when encountering unprecedented territory with a semantic shift transpired. The concept of the transformational digital strategy was conceived in May 21, post numerous lockdown extensions. The realization for the organization was that we would have to have a new shape. It would become irreversible, and due to new and preferred ways of working with external and external stakeholders. The resultant would be a digital strategy was a paradigmatic shift from a post-modern perspective to that of what we now call a hybridized synergistic model. And implementations for the business were modifications to operational practices, including administration and delivery, and development and teaching, and resources in terms of assessing in digital formats. So the project rationale. Firstly, we needed to stabilize the organization. Coming out of the pandemic, obviously lots of disruption. We needed to get to a position where delivery, this type of delivery, would become the norm and the expected, as opposed to being just the off chance or through the pandemic. We wanted to overturn the authoritarian and directive pandemic coping strategies. We wanted to return to our previous autonomous culture, which gave us the independence and allowed us to develop and deliver how we wanted to deliver. We had to recognize restraints to the agency, so our independence. There would still be restraints in place for a number of months following the pandemic. We wanted to establish an incremental change within the whole organization. So we were looking at a transformative process across a recognized period. We wanted to re-establish community of practice. And so we came up and wanted to develop a 3-stage digital strategy. And in doing that, we would need to improve technological resources. We would need to provide additional staff training and upskilling. We would need to accept new advanced remote ways of working. We would also need to meet stakeholder requirements in terms of not just our staff team, but the learners, the employers that we were working for, and of course any government compliances that are required through government funding. It would allow a paradigmatic shift, but it would allow us to integrate a hybridized synergistic model. And it was our intention from the outset that we would also contribute to existing knowledge and share with fellow educational professionals, not in a specific way, but to more but we would be able to relate and transfer knowledge to other organisations, not necessarily just in education, but any organisation that was undergoing a digital transformation.
So what we did was we had some research aims, and the research aims really were to ascertain, was remote delivery feasible? Was it feasible where we had apprentices, learners in workplaces where practical observation was required? So would that even be something we could consider? Consider what a digital strategy entails and have an understanding of what that meant. We wanted to understand how we could have multiple digital platforms, but incorporate them into one single cohesive model. So we had a much tighter provision. Wanted to determine what remote delivery looked like, try and really get hold of that and try and understand what that would look like and what that would mean for the business. Consider if staff, learners and employers, and even wider really, could adapt to the concept of digital working and remote remote teaching and the implications that may come with that. And also to then think about what sort of development staff and learners and employers might need to help them and support them to be able to engage with the digital strategy. So we started off with a literature review, and the literature review was about empirical engagement. It was about understanding what that existing knowledge was and what literature was already out there. It also was to give us a justification for the need for new knowledge, so we could see where that research or where our research might sit. The research questions then gave us the logic. So the literature review provided us with the research questions to give us the logic of those, and also to drive the research design for practical application of that. So from the literature review, then the research questions, we made sure that they were practical and focused. They'd emerged from the literature. It made that the aims were actually researchable. It placed the research then in a paradigm. We then had an understanding of where we fitted. We kind of thought we knew where we fitted, but actually until we'd done the literature review, and actually then looked at the research questions, we then didn't know until that point in what paradigm that had placed us in. From there, then we were able to have framework or in direction to the research. So what we found in the literature was some common themes, and we found themes in terms of the wording, in terms of things like shift and paradigm shift, and things like the third way or the third space, which related to technology and engagement and those shifting practices. We also saw blended learning and hybrid learning as also common words and common themes within the literature. We also, though, had to be mindful of that we are subject to external measures, so things like Ofsted. So we also needed to look at what Ofsted was saying. You know, what do we need to do to meet their requirements? And Ofsted were talking about different types of learning as being synchronous and asynchronous. Synchronous being where there are live lessons, and asynchronous being where it's a pre-recorded lesson that somebody could access post the recording. And we found wordings around scaffolding, both in the literature review, in the wider literature, but also within the Ofsted literature as well. So with this in mind, we kind of had this sort of view as in terms of this is what we're seeing in the literature, and it gave us some direction then for our research questions. Some of the curriculum models then we looked at, as you can see there, were cyclical, objective, process, etc. So what we looked at in terms of those was, we looked at interactive in terms of students' interaction. We looked at linear models where we had things like experiential learning, curriculum planning where we were looking at things like society and psychology, and descriptive interactive models. In contrast, we also then looked at some objective models, but also found in there things like spiritual and academic blends. So we found some words in there we didn't expect to find in objective models. And we looked at aesthetic models, where it's very much about learners' hand being hands-on, because a lot of the learners we work with are in practical roles and in practical jobs. So we needed to have a model that sort of linked to that as well, to be hands-on. And we looked at naturalistic things where there was a deliberate and deliberation and consensus and shared visions. And cyclical models, which were the models that we found we identified with most, where they were logical and sequential. and thinking of Ofsted and the requirements that we need also to meet in terms of Ofsted, we found that actually sequential in terms of these models was something that Ofsted were also looking for in terms of sequencing of lessons. So we found that the cyclical models actually sat quite nicely, but we didn't want to just have one model, so we wanted to have a blend of those models. We were already sat within a postmodern paradigm, and we recognised that and we knew that, so we wanted to sort of be able to take that a step further. We'd already done that in going postmodern, and we'd already taken that a step further in terms of engagement and development, but we were looking for something a little bit more. There's a link on there as to one of the pieces of research we had a look at in terms of postmodernism and the curriculum, and which gave us a little bit of insight and direction really. We had some initial research questions. We had too many initial research questions, in fact, and we looked to condense those. So these were the original 2 sets of research questions that we had. And what we did was then we streamlined those and came up with these questions, these 11 questions. And these 11 questions considered things around what digitalisation would look like and what we wanted in our agenda, what being successful looked like, what we wanted the delivery to be able to do, and what our third space was going to look like. What was technology going to look like for us in our organisation? We also wanted to look at things like our platforms, our website, our e-platforms, and how easy were they to navigate, negotiate, and also when our employers and learners were looking at those platforms, what did we want them to do? It needed to be purposeful. So these are the research questions that we came up with, and this is then what we then based on our research on really. So looking here then at the construction of the research, we thought about the ontological and epistemological assumptions associated with this research. And we recognised that the epistemological position was that of subjectivity. We were looking at experiences and perceptions, and we were interested in the nature and the forms of knowledge, which then gave rise to the ontological positions of phenomenology, which, because we were interested in the subjective and the experience, we're also interested in individual consciousness and the consciousness and that nature of being and those social constructs. We then took that a step further and looked at emancipatory action and then how that linked in with critical theory. And then things like in the interpretivist traditions and the intricacies of naturally occurring activity as well. We also were looking at finding thick descriptions. So we were looking for descriptions that gave us some information that we could then work with, and those interpretations from a whole host of people as part of the research, the whole team. So if we look at the paradigm then, so we talked about this paradigm and this paradigm shift. So we were what we saw ourselves as being in a postmodern paradigm, a subjective paradigm, in where we were looking at more than one perspective. We were very much interested in outliers and quirks. We weren't looking for single truths, certainly looking for perception and differences and similarities, and all the ways in which social reality can be constructed and interpreted. So it very much put us into that postmodern position. What we found then is we then moved and transitioned from that into what we've then referred to as a hybridized synergistic perspective, which we will explain in a little while. But we found that transition ourselves. We'd moved within that paradigm, although we found that we still had roots in the postmodern paradigm. There was some movement in the business because of the research we'd done, and that research we had done was using action research. That was the approach that we took. Which again, over the next couple of slides, we're going to explain what we did there. The methods that we used was qualitative. So we have a recognition that action research actually is a flexible approach in which you can have a mixed methodology. So that could be qualitative and quantitative. But actually, from what we were looking at and based on our research questions, it placed us actually looking at qualitative rather than quantitative. We didn't have a hypothesis. We weren't setting out to prove something. We were genuinely looking to find out and be able to make changes based on what we found out. So we found ourselves actually in that qualitative position because of that. The instruments then was guided by the qualitative method, and the instruments we used were observation. We had focus groups. We used a lot of journaling and looking at documentary evidence as well, and they provided us some insight. The other things that we needed to consider then were the miscellaneous, the ethics, the positionality, the validity and the rigor and the consistency. And we were mindful of that. We are an independent training provider in which we have in part government funded provision. So we need to be aware that actually, yes, you know, we are an independent training provider, but there is some government funding in there, you know, so we needed to think about those ethics, and ethically we needed to make sure that we were working and conducting our research ethically, but also our work itself ethically as well. And then considering things like commercial and non-commercial income generation, again in an organisation where we have government funding, so it can sometimes be seen as being very controversial. So we had a real understanding of that as well. So ethics to us was really important, that we got that right. So looking at the action and research, what we did, and the reason action and research was appropriate for this research, was that it was small scale intervention. We looked at cyclical spirals. So we had a 10-stage loop approach, starting with the vision and the time frame, and then the planning of what we were going to do. And as you can see there, all the way through to replanning. And this was our 10-stage approach. And this is what we followed when we were doing our action research. We were mindful of being change-centric. And improvements through of changes in terms of practice and language. We also worked with action research and as an approach because it was collaborative, cooperative, and the participants were co-collaborators as well. So we were all collaborating, we were all working together in this. It's based on real world and workplace situ realism. So we were looking at that at a practical level, considering that we work with lots of people who are in practical jobs and practical roles, and we're doing a practical job ourselves as well. And we wanted that research so we could understand the social situations as well. It's transformative through critical inquiry, and it's open-minded, which again aligns with the postmodernism and the post-postmodernism, but also the hybridized model as well, which we moved to. And it was also about sharing values, and that all opinions are heard, all voices are heard, and that very much was then communication reliance as well. So action research was appropriate for this research for that reason, those reasons. In addition, we then had emancipatory praxis in terms of empowerment, ownership, development, autonomy and agency, because this is what action research would consist of. And we talked earlier about wanting to return to that agency, wanting to have that agency, and wanting to be able to have that autonomy and make our own decisions, and be able to move the business forward based on that. We looked at problem posing as well as problem solving. So it wasn't just about problem solving, but actually what other issues are there? Okay, and that aligns again with the action research. We looked at egalitarianism in terms of hierarchies. So within this business, there is a hierarchy. However, in terms of this research, there wasn't. We all came to this together as equals, and we had a concept of equality within this piece of research. As I said, we were ethically minded and very conscious of our position and our positions within the research. It was a self-critical inquiry. It was reflective to understand our own practices and our own self-worth and our own well-being. And it was very much participant integrated and about professional development for all of us as well. So again, the reasons why this approach was appropriate for this research, it gave us what we wanted in terms of answering those research questions, and it sat within that paradigm as well.
Okay, so in terms of project phases, as we described earlier, there were 4 actual physical phases to the project. There was a pre-project phase, which included the initial concept, various meetings, and the research element, before we then moved into phase 1 around June 2021, which was looking at redevelopment of the website and of the landing page. Phase 2 then followed that, where we specifically looked at how are people going to access all of these platforms, but not just that, how are we going to get the platforms to then integrate and talk to each other and link with each other. And phase 3 of the project, although it's got an end date of May 2023, it is an ongoing phase because it's digitalisation of the curriculum, and the curriculum will evolve and continue to evolve over a number of years while ever the current qualifications and standards are in place. So we will need to keep that phase, although for the project perspective it ends in May, the actual digitalisation of the curriculum will be ongoing. And then we, as we said earlier, we introduced a phase 4 where we could actually understand the benefits and realisation of what the project has brought to us. So the project phase content covered you know, quite a substantial amount of work. Really, it was the digital concept itself, various things, and you know, and developments would need risk assessing throughout the project. We held regular meetings and action planning. I think there was 26 meetings across the project to date. There was the review of the literature and the research around that, which obviously produced our action based research. We then journaled everything along the way, and it's the end result is we are looking to publish an article on this to be able to share with other organisations. We had numerous liaisons with our ePortfolio platform, which became the centre of the digital hub, with other platforms talking to that particular platform. And you know, the onboarding process and end-to-end digital providers, which included website, social media, text messaging service, plagiarism platforms, and BKSB, which is our initial assessments and English and maths platform. So we needed to bring all of those together, get them talking to each other, get them working alongside each other and working with each other. Throughout the whole process, we had to consider compliances. A vast majority of our income is government funded, and we are expected to meet numerous compliances to obtain and keep that government funding. We encountered a whole new world, and especially around safeguarding. And had to work with lots of stakeholders. You know, that safeguarding is a massive aspect of Ofsted, and you have to be able to demonstrate that you are providing a safe environment for your learners. And it's absolutely phenomenal how much you lose through going remote and digital, to how much you can impact on a person's safeguarding when it's face-to-face or classroom based. If you're in a physical building, and you know, you can provide so much more safeguarding for an individual than you actually could do when somebody's on the end of a screen as such, or a platform, and you've got no impact on the environment that they are working in. We had lots of stakeholder liaison. Again, you know, stakeholders not just being learners, being employers, being other organisations like ourselves, being the government, you know, ESFA agency. We had to have an whole organisation approach to training. So we had to understand and provide training for skills shortages within our own organisation. Information, advice and guidance has always been at the forefront of what Dear Apprenticeships provides. And so we had to understand what it was, what information, advice and guidance we wanted people to see on these different platforms and on the website, on the ePortfolio. And we had to be clear that we were giving the right advice to the right people. We held internal conferences with the team where we got to discuss other projects within this project, or other tasks within this project. There was a significant amount of resource development to do. when you're out face to face or in a classroom and all your resources are paper based, we had to digitalize all of those. So that was quite a significant part of the project. And then we also had to look at how we would market the business going forward and how we would interact with social media going forward. Just another slide on the 3-phase approach. Phase 1 being website and landing page. We developed a whole new website, and in developing the website, we were actually able to incorporate some training courses which are accessible to our learners, to our employers, and they can use within their organizations on things like safeguarding, on things like mental health and well-being, and then more government focused things on prevent and radicalization. So we've got a whole new resource page on the website where people can access free training that we're engaged with. The phase 2 part of the approach was getting the platforms to talk to each other and interact with each other. And then phase 3 of the project, which is probably the largest because of the amount of curriculum that we deliver. As you can see on the small photograph there, we dissected every part of the curriculum and then looked at how we would digitalize each aspect of that. And then we've got the benefits realization, which we're just coming to the end of now. Throughout the project, it was all planned and it was all monitored in terms of the Gantt chart. And you can see how we broke down the individual deliverables down the left-hand side and planned those into various months across the project. And that just extends again the chart on how we delivered the project across the duration. We clearly experienced challenges along the way and some tensions. And we've brought up a few here. Things like external stakeholders not being able to communicate digitally. Surprisingly, you know, an organisation like the government would not accept electronic signatures. They had to be wet signatures. They've slowly come on board themselves and getting that way. But also external stakeholders interpretations of our new digital procedures. So in digitalizing things like our enrollment forms, etc., and processes that we were going through, our onboarding process, which includes information, advice and guidance and initial assessments and things like that. It was difficult at times to get you know, funding bodies to accept the way that we were doing that. There was, of course, limited literature on digital remote learning and narrow data sources, simply because when it come down to government funded provision, they didn't allow it before. It had to be delivered face to face. So there's actually very limited literature and narrow data sources, which enabled us to answer our questions in considerable depth. So we had to make those ourselves. You know, we had to go with it and create our own data. Unprecedented ground when working with inspectors, and primarily this is around the safeguarding again. You know, the Ofsted inspectors, we would be in correspondence and in webinars with Ofsted inspectors, and the questions they were asking us: how do you make that? How do you know that is a safe environment that learner is in? Well, how did we know? They're on the end of a computer. We didn't know what was around them. We didn't know who was around them. We didn't know if they were being forced to be on the end of a computer or anything. So, you know, you have to take a long, hard look at that and develop a whole new set of protocols around trying to make the safest environment possible for learners. We then also encountered, you know, the natural resistance to change within any organisation, and the fear of digitalisation and skills shortfalls. You know, not everyone is comfortable working from a screen, operating IT, and especially on top of all of the other expectations we're putting them, and in terms of like safeguard and making sure it's a safe environment. So there was a natural resistance. We did find that one helpful tact in that natural resistance was the inclusion of everybody within the project. That got buy-in from the outset, and people understood why we were doing this, and inevitably that led them to then come to us if they felt that they weren't comfortable with something or needed upskilling. So it wasn't a case of people hiding away. People were then open to the change and open to reskilling. And of course, while we was going through this project, we had to maintain continuity and organisation functionality. Without doing that, the business wouldn't have money coming in. So the change happened within that. Unexpected benefits then, from a business focus, the whole organisation was involved. We had a shared understanding, it was standardised, and that improved implementation. Business direction, it was a business strategy from an organisation-wide approval, so people were on board from the outset. The investment, we could reinvest and invest in development for staff, learners, and even employers in some cases. What we have since found since doing the benefits is we've established that there's been a 90% reduction in annual costs for travel and subsistence, which we've then been able to reinvest into the company. We have time savings of at least 8 days per month per member of staff. So that is time that staff would normally be out on the road. And in doing that, what we've decided to do is retain caseload numbers. It would be quite easy to have those time savings and cost savings and increase staff caseload numbers as a benefit to the establishment. We haven't taken that option because we want to further develop the company, and so we have invested in our staff in training and development, and it will allow us to develop the company more in projects like this. In terms of staff recruitment, we now have a broader nationwide staff recruitment opportunities. We don't have to recruit staff from a particular area to meet a particular employer. They can come from anywhere and operate remotely. And in terms of delivery, it allows us to have open cohorts, which is multiple learners from multiple employers and even across numerous industries. And they are now able to share their practices and offer peer-to-peer support through learners. Additional benefits is liaisons with other educational organisations and opportunities like today, presenting to yourselves. We've done other presentations to other organisations. Curriculum designs, we've obviously now got a digitalised curriculum. Technology, we've been able to bring in more technology, more platforms than we originally first anticipated. We've been able to engage in a new language and standardize the academic digital language, things like face-to-face, real-time and real-time delivery. Staff development, again, in terms of staff training. Outside of the digital strategy, we've been able to offer more training sector-based and professionally. Well-being, staff not being out on the road for hours a day has improved well-being. We run an annual survey for staff, and staff have certainly said their well-being has increased due to the reduced amount of driving, etc. We can do the business development is now done online. We don't have to go out and meet people face to face. It becomes a lot easier, a lot quicker for employers. They prefer it that way. We have also made further reductions because less time is spent on the road with staff and more time is now available to spend with learners. So we've been able to increase learner interactions, which has actually transferred then into a reduction of course duration by on average 3 months per course. And learner retention has increased during the project as well. So pre-project, on a particular standard that we looked at, we had 18 leavers. Post-project, we had 1 leaver.
So in summary, due to the global pandemic, there was a need for us to change. We had to change, and we had to be reactive and directive in that. There was an increase then because of that in situational, directive, bureaucratic leadership, and the agency was certainly reduced and structure was increased, which was a different way for us. It didn't sit comfortably with us. So this project set out to develop a digital strategy whilst also transitioning to a remote provision. As we've discussed, there was the concept, the rationale, the literature review, the aims, the research questions, and things like the ontological and epistemological assumptions and the position of the research and the paradigm in which it places, and all those considerations as well. The post-postmodern paradigm transition to that of a hybridized model, and then from that we were able to conduct action research using qualitative methods as well, and in particular the journaling it was one of the main things that we did in terms of that. The key findings then from doing this research have been that there was an exceed of the initial perception of what may occur. Considering that we were coming at this with an open mind, we didn't have, as we said earlier, hypothesis. We didn't come to this with what we were expecting and an anticipation, but we had some ideas about what we might see when we got to the end. The digitalization has enabled a more efficient, sustainable, secure business and environment as well. A real high level of whole organisation participation. There was the cost savings that Carla's just talked about, and greater opportunities also for personal and professional development. And there was that increased flexibility for the staff of working from the office, from the home, from learners' workplace. So that flexibility, and again that staff wellbeing was also part of that. Masterclasses permitted inclusion of learners from across different industries and areas, and they were able to learn from each other from beyond their own workplace. So we had people in very different industries working together. So what we came up with, and our contribution to research really, is what we called this model, this spiral model, this Fibonacci model, and this is a sequence model based on looking at multiple curriculum designs, and this is the design we came up with. So what we had was, we had the programme and the course and the overview. We then thought about the units and the delivery, and then we looked at all these different models and the models we had looked at as part of that initial research. And we liked the cyclical models, and so we decided that actually if we had a spiral model, it would give us this continual growth and this indefinite growth, and this indefinite spiral, this indefinite continuous improvement and change. So this model is a model that we came up with. We designed this model in order for us to be able to continue that and continue to develop, but also to be able to contribute to the sector in terms of another model and another way of working. Our contribution to knowledge then is the paradigmatic change that we had. So we had this development of a hybridized synergistic model. So to sort of explain that really, that is using multiple digital platforms in terms of the hybridized, the processes and ways of working. We've got the synergistic, we've got the collaborative, the iterative process, the cohesive process. We're then looking at sort of a unique paradigm. So this is the paradigm that we found ourselves in, moved from that postmodern paradigm. And then that was founded on empirical engagement. So engagement, collaboration, team focused, autonomy, freedom, agency, but also considering that we are also in a political and educational environment, because there is a political element, because we have to an extent have some government funding. So there was that consideration as well. Thinking about social reality and the reality for everybody who was involved. and developing that then into that emancipatory independence, where again we have that subjective meanings, the values, the interpretation, the idealism, and also that autonomy again, that freedom, that agency. So the model that we came up with was this hybridized synergistic model, which was about being developmental and progressive, but also taking us back to that agency that we were seeking, and that way of working. Thank you for listening. That is our presentation on the evolution of how we have sort of gone digital and what we've done, and we welcome any questions. Thank you.
Well done, both of you. What a really kind of great run through. So I have some questions, but I'm also happy for people to put things in the chat if they want to ask you questions as well. So well done, first of all, for doing our first lunchtime session. Great that we were able to hold a lunchtime session. I realise it's a little bit earlier than lunchtime, because I've got a programme committee meeting at 1 o'clock, so I'm about to dash into the university. So my questions are around what next. So you've presented your strategy, talked about what you've done. So publication, have you already published? Are you in the process of publication? Talk us through that.
Okay, so we've journaled, and we have an article that we've written to an extent, which became a little bit bigger, so it then had chapters. So currently this article has 5 chapters, so it kind of took on the form of a book, an unfinished book, but it's taken on that form. The intention is that we will maybe have a blog from it, or perhaps an article from that in terms of what we've done. So that's kind of the intention, and continuation of sort of sharing this with other organisations in terms of this is the model we've done and what we've done taken, really.
And I think sometimes, you know, this happens with research projects, as you well know, Claire, with your thesis.
Yes.
You know, so okay, great, you've got a book, it's got 5 chapters, but actually, as you said, then distilling it back down to a blog so it reaches a wider audience, using the Belmas blog function for that, perhaps the sort of 3,000 to 4,000 word paper, an MIE type publication. And then thinking about how it kind of gets out to that kind of that wider audience. So I'm not surprised at all to hear actually that it's got 5 chapters, given how some of this morning's presentation was. So Alison's putting a question in the chat, which is, what surprised you most about the project? And then we'll come to Narcis's comment.
Okay, what surprises most? I think moving back to some of those unexpected benefits. So maybe the direction that the business took, the cost savings was certainly something that we didn't expect, in terms of 90% reduction in terms of those costs, which then enabled us to be able to plough that back into the business. So I guess that was one of the big sort of surprises, really, was that amount of time that was saved because of that.
And I think along the way, there was also other organisations not being in a similar position to accept, you know, things like electronic signatures, and, you know, government organisations saying they're not allowed. You know, it was just you've thrown us digitally through the pandemic, and yet you still won't budge on things like accepting a digital signature.
And were you happy with the reasons for that? So I mean, is there a fraud direction for that? Was there accountability for those sort of challenges that you faced?
No, I think there was confusion is what there was, you know, and understandable. You know, the country was in an unprecedented place, and obviously focus within government agencies was in different, was in sort of, if we look at the ESFA, then obviously it was about teaching in schools and children, etc. And it was just it was just a burden on independent, you know, on companies like ourselves, that even though that we were still working with companies and they still wanted to enroll apprentices, and they were happy with our delivery being remote, that we couldn't then enroll these people because we're not allowed out on site with them to get the wet signatures. And we were having to post forms out to them to send to them, you know, with prepaid envelopes for them to post back, and forever chasing that. And it was just, you know, thankfully they worked, you know, post pandemic, and things have changed now. But during the time, it was a difficult time.
Yeah, and I think there is something, isn't there, about making sure we record that, account for it, making sure we've actually learnt from it. You know, I have family members who are very interested in science and who are medics and things, and they would say that we are between pandemics. You know, we're not just post pandemic. And I think that when you talk and listen to that sort of language, it does make us think about, you know, what sort of situations we could be in again, and how we record the learning, you know, that we've been through sort of as a consequence, really. I guess from my point of view, you know, in Belfast, just in terms of the educational leadership, the management, the administration that I was sort of listening to through all of that, I think a blog where you're kind of pulling out, here's the impact on our role as educational leaders, because educational leaders come in all different sort of shapes, sizes, inside all sorts of different organizations. And I think, you know, sometimes we forget that, you know, we default to, like the ESFA do, you know, a school environment. So I think it's quite interesting to hear that kind of wider voice being pulled out through your presentation. So just a comment from Nargis here. She said it was a very interesting advanced study. So I think we all agree with that.
Thank you.
In particular, and you are absolutely bang on the hour. Well done.
Brilliant.
So
congratulations, your study is very interesting. Can I have a question? Very short question I have.
Yes, do.
Okay, the study is very interesting, but I have a question that what will be the instrument to measure the learning focus and their attention? What instrument or tools we can use for collection of attention and focus of learners?
Okay. So I think from looking at, so from working with learners, looking at their incremental progress is part of that measure. I think also looking at the number of learners that have gone through the endpoint assessment and the achievements there. But something else we also measure is the number of learners who have progressed in their role. So, for example, we look at a measure destination data, but also learner promotions, and has somebody, as a result of what they've done, has that meant that person has been promoted in their role, or has applied that learning in their role to put them into a different position. So I think those measures would be in terms of sort of examination at the end, which is kind of, I suppose, the obvious one, but also the progress along the way. Also, we also measure softer skills, so things like someone's confidence developing, for example, and you know the differences that might make to them and their wider family, and what that might look like for that person, and that sort of personal changes, not necessarily professional, but personal changes for people as well.
That's lovely, great, Claire, thank you very much. And just a note before we finish, if you're watching this on catch up, this is the first one of our lunchtime sessions. So the team were very brave this morning to be the first ones. And if you have a particular research project you want to bring to one of our lunchtime sessions to share with members, either live or so that we can put it on the website for catch up, please do get in touch with the office. Thanks very much, everybody. Really interesting. And good luck with your publications.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Bye. Thank you, everybody.
Good